Evening all. I'm back from my holiday to Italy, and yeah, I had a really good time. Venice in particular was amazing. It lives up to its billing. Really like a Canaletto painting come to life because none of the buildings have changed in centuries. So we took I think what do they call it, the Vapiro, or the Vaporato. Somebody can correct me in the comments below, but essentially it's the bus, the water bus. You get on at the station end of Venice, and you go all along the Grand Canal. And as I said, the buildings are the same that's been for centuries. The only things that changed is the technology of the boats that go up and down. They've got these lovely Riva water taxis that are very well designed. No, I mean they're just taxis. There's dozens of them, but they look really nice, and you've got the gondolas as well. And it wasn't too crowded when we went there. It was a nice sunny day, but it was busy but not crowded. So we were able to get into St Mark's Church and up the bell tower and just go around St Mark's Square without feeling hemmed in, crowded, harassed by hawkers and peddlers and such. So that was great. We also went to Verona, a really nice town. I can recommend it. Um, and yeah, we were in this house out in the countryside, which had its own swimming pool and very private grounds. So we were well set up for the week. The thing is that people were asking me online, oh, do check out the political situation because there is an upcoming election, or there's a change of government. The coalition between Five Star and the Northern League has collapsed. New government's going to come in. Is there going to be a general election? What will this mean for Italy? Because Italy, with Salvini heading up Lega Nord, uh, looked like it was going to follow the path of Britain, stand up to the EU and try and get out. Now the forces of the conformity with the EU are muscling in. Now, on the ground level in Italy, life goes on. There isn't the same amount of political discussion I found out there that you have in the UK. To be fair, I'm on holiday, so I really didn't dip into it that much. But just flicking through the TV stations and trying to catch newspaper headlines, I wasn't getting a sense that uh, this was engaging people as much as Brexit was engaging the British public back home. Maybe it's something different. I think the Italian culture kind of pervades, particularly in these northern areas where I felt there was less. When I was in Rome last year, I just saw there were so many migrants from Africa there, hawking, hustling, peddling, and you could see on the faces of the Carabinieri and the Italian army, which they deploy them on the streets, and a very visible presence in Italian cities. I noticed that. And they felt annoyed. They felt like they wanted to get stuck in, put the boot into some of these hustlers. Up in Venice and Verona, the presence wasn't so great. But what I did notice from the Italian cable TV stations that we had where we were staying, there was a huge amount of uh, Arabic television channels that they had there, a large amount, and Russian. So it's like the Arabic countries and Middle Eastern countries are just pumping television onto Italian audiences, and also the Russians are doing the same. I thought there were more. We had about two or three English language channels, BBC World, CNN, Bloomberg, but and frankly, the Russians and the Middle Eastern channels are just absolutely swamping Italian TV screens. So I found that interesting. But I did bring back some Italian biscuits. I can't find any, so I think my family have snaffled them, as is their wont. We have a saying in this house: "There's the quick and the hungry," and I'm often one of the hungry. So, but I know where the secret stash of custard creams are, so I took one. Anything else? Holiday reading? Well, I finished a couple of books. I'm trying to find Blue at the Mizzen by Patrick O'Brien. I know I have a copy of it somewhere around in the house. It's the last one in the Aubrey Maturin series, and I can't find it. So it's the only one I haven't read. and anyway, but in the meantime, I'm going to be looking at this book, The Crisis of Parliaments, English History of 1509 to 1660. So covering the Tudors from Henry VIII on to the Restoration. This is actually an old history textbook of mine from university. How do I know this? Because I used to do that when I was a student. Write my full name down the spine. But I'm rereading this because I've forgotten practically everything from this book. But I thought it was interesting. The title alone, "Crisis of Parliaments." Just looking into the history, because I think English parliamentary or British parliamentary tradition kind of starts here, and it's the formation going from this kind of the idea of absolute monarchy to a kind of was it the division of sovereignty, the division of authority in British history. So I'm going to be eagerly reading this. I've just read the first chapter when they're talking about law there introduced in Henry VIII's time. There was a large number of people getting into debt because they're wearing clothing that is very expensive, made of very expensive materials, as a kind of attempt to boosting status, but it was leaving them in debt. So a law was passed that people of certain social classes couldn't buy fabric that was the exclusive property of the wealthy. So yeah, I'll let you know how that gets on. Okay, so in other news, what have I noticed this week? Well, even in Italy, it was hard to escape Brexit, mainly because I was logging onto the computer after everybody went to bed and was keeping up to date with things. And if there's a recurring theme of the last week or so, it's about how delusional some people are. Not only delusional, but they're becoming loud, and they are getting a lot of attention. So much so that they're shouting their delusion so much, there's a danger of it becoming a mainstream narrative. What do I mean? Well, in one of the bizarrest incidents I felt this week that happened online was Sadiq Khan tweeted out something that was actually very sane and rational from him. So he was there was a day of uh, remembering the victims of totalitarian regimes, remembering the victims of Nazism and Stalinism. And Sadiq Khan tweeted out that he was supporting this day of remembering the victims of Nazism and Stalinism, and saying hopefully it would never happen again. And he was attacked by hardcore members of the left, his own kind, who were saying, no, 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 how dare you condemn Stalinism? It was nowhere near as bad as Nazism. Stalin and Stalinism fought and defeated the Nazis. It's only the Allies the Western Allies who swoop in and claim the credit. And then people quite rightly pointed out the huge death toll of the atrocities under Stalin. But no, they dismissed them, saying it was 600,000 tops. One person actually tweeted it out, 600, a verified blue check mark as well, tweeted out that there was only 600,000 deaths. That's not in, pales into insignificance when compared with the Nazis. And then it's pointed out quite rightly the actual death toll, which is in tens of millions. But they dismiss this, all Western Allied propaganda, and who the Western Allies in league with the Nazis. How so? Well, apparently Stalin wanted to go to war with Germany in the late 30s, but the Western Allies turned down his offers, proof that they were sympathetic to the Nazis. And that Nazi-Soviet pact to invade Poland, well, Poland were the aggressors there, and it was a temporary measure. But when Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, of course, they joined in enthusiastically and almost single-handedly beat the Nazis, which the Western Allies were incapable of doing because their sympathies were actually with the Nazis. This is all revisionist bullshit. Okay, I don't often swear on the Weekly Biscuit, but I am here because yes, there is truth that Stalin did make some tentative offer of going to war with Nazi Germany in the late 30s and approached Britain and France about the idea. But what these lying scumbags on the left do is that they leave out the bit where the Western Allies are still gripped, they're still following the theory of appeasement because they are averse to fighting a war. Particularly the people of the Western nations are very war averse. And speaking, roping in the Americans as well, the First World War left a huge emotional and psychological scar on people and on governments. That the idea of going to war in 1937, 1938 was still abhorrent to most. It was a very reluctant Britain and France that finally, in the spring of 1939, accepted that there would probably be a war and to prepare for it. And they just weren't prepared when war actually broke out in September 1939. And they leave out another bit about Stalin, is the fact that he thought uh, that Hitler would not attack him for many years, if at all. He thought that the Nazi-Soviet pact was the beginning of a new era, a new phase. So yes, they had clashed in their proxy war in Spain in the late 1930s, but after the Nazi-Soviet pact and the division of Poland, Stalin just refused to believe that Hitler would attack the Soviet Union in 1941. And when it did happen, for about 2 weeks, Stalin just locked himself away, refusing to believe it, did not give orders. Ground was lost. Troops were slaughtered. The Soviets were heavily battered in those first initial weeks in 1941 because Stalin refused to exercise his leadership. And he had already purged his army of some of its best generals and thinkers. So it's utterly ludicrous. But the state of uh, bad education. These are people who I don't think came from bad school environments. It's just that they have been educated, a lot of them at university level, but yet they have chosen to reject serious academic study, peer-reviewed study, and instead have gone with the Marxist narrative theory. I clashed with Marxist historians at university. I didn't have any Marxist historian professors. I don't think there were any. I couldn't name a single one who I believe was a Marxist and teaching Marxist history. But there were a lot of students who did, and they would clash with our lecturers and tutors and me. Because they say, oh, we got to look at it from the Marxist history perspective. And I remember sort of being in study groups with some of these people, and you'd have trying to work on a presentation for a seminar. And what they were doing was just discarding facts, just discarding evidence, rejecting it because the theory came first. And if there's any evidence that undermined the theory, it had to be discarded. And I clashed with them over that. I said, you just can't do that. It was one of those parts of my life where I knew I was never going to be on the left, because even back then I could see everything was built on lies and fraud. And this has that thing that happened on Twitter with Sadiq Khan condemning Stalinism has led on to some other delusional thinking that I noticed on Twitter, particularly now that Boris Johnson and the current government have prorogued Parliament for all 3 days. And how it's being talked of as a coup and anti-democratic. This is the mad rantings, frankly, of the pro EU lobby. You can look at the facts, you can look at evidence, and saying this isn't a coup under any circumstance, but it's being presented as one. And again, like the Marxist historians, facts are being discarded to fit a narrative. And lo and behold, who is leaping forward to calling it a coup and saying we need to resist and evoking images of World War II? Yeah, but hard left activists like Paul Mason and Owen Jones. What a surprise. But what was truly surprising for me was the announcement by Kenneth Clarke, former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Conservative Chancellor of the Exchequer, and a pretty decent Conservative Chancellor of the Exchequer. But he said he would back a Corbyn-led government um, in order to keep Britain in the EU. And you just think he's completely lost it. A man who has dedicated his entire adult life into uh, preserving capitalism, big business. I mean, um, people have asked me, why is it that people like Heseltine and Kenneth Clarke, or some of the other pro EU conservatives like Dominic Reeves, Sam Gimia, and those who have left the party, Nick Bowles is another one. How can they be conservatives back the EU? And that's because these are capitalists. At the end of the day, that's what, and the Conservative Party is the natural home for capitalists. The other parties don't offer um, a strong capitalist core, if they do at all. So they won't feel at home anywhere else. But they are pro big business. They, for people like Kenneth Clarke, where a socialist would see big government as a solution, Kenneth Clarke would see big corporations as the solution. He's not interested in entrepreneurs. He's not interested in small businesses. He's interested in big businesses. And at some point, um, massive corporations start acting like governments. And Ken Clarke just straddles that world, sort of a government that's hand in hand with the big corporations, and this fits in with his EU ideology. And you'll find that a lot of these other pro EU conservatives are of the same ilk. They want their big, massive capitalist corporations walking hand in hand with a government that regulates heavily on social policy, but perhaps is very liberal on its economic policy, particularly towards big corporations. Oh, yeah, no, you can introduce as much legislation to keep the entrepreneurs and the small businesses down, but you free up big business to do pretty much whatever it wants. But for Ken Clarke to throw his weight behind Corbyn is delusional, because um, I heard that Clarke thinks that Corbyn will be tamed by the system. You put him in uh, power, but the system, the forces of stability, will contain him. This is a massive gamble, and it just shows to me that for Ken Clarke, the EU is a cult. It's a faith. It's something to be utterly believed in, and it's astounding. I think he's completely lost the plot, and he should be immediately have the whip withdrawn from him. I think so too with Michael Heseltine. This is a level of disloyalty that cannot stand. And I think the Conservative Party, I've mentioned this on previous episodes of The Biscuit, is that it just needs a purge. You can dissent over the party policies, but once you start actively supporting another party over and above your own, you cannot serve two masters. It's an old biblical saying, and this is true. So for Ken Clarke, what are you going to do? If you're going to back a Corbyn-led Labour government, get out of the Conservative Party, join Labour. Likewise, Michael Heseltine, if he backs the Liberal Democrats forming power, get out of the Conservative Party, join the Liberal Democrats. It's that simple. And I think if you're in the grassroots party, you need to be lobbying hard to the party that you are not satisfied with this. Meanwhile, the government is doing what it can to as out of the European Union. And for those really die-hard leavers, I would say just keep your powder dry. I mean, there's all this talk about Brexit betrayal, and that Boris Johnson only wants to remove the backstop but keep the rest of the withdrawal agreement. These things are always negotiated across a table. You know what? Don't imagine any idea that any plan that's going to come up with is going to be the pure vision. There is going to be some compromises along the way. But the thing is that now the threat of a no deal, the fact I'm reminded of the line in Excalibur, the film where Merlin says to Uther, "He has given Uther, now you must." I feel that this is where we are with Brexit. Britain has, and the Boris Johnson cabinet have dangled the prospect of, well, we don't want that much of a overhaul. I think they do, really. I think they want a big overhaul of the withdrawal agreement. I think they want to negotiate something very different. But they need to sound reasonable. Okay, so you dangle a few carrots and see if the EU will budge. And typical EU, they're not budging. I don't know. Seriously, I don't get the cult of the EU. I really don't understand the fanatical devotion to something that will not change, except in the direction of full federalism. And what we have now is this cult-like mentality. We're seeing the protests, the strikes, the call for a general action, to stop the coup. There's just the lies being told. We are not a coup. And the funny thing is that people who use the word fascist, Nazi, coup, have no idea what these words actually mean. Okay, there are people who lived through brutal fascist dictatorships, even not from that long ago, or from Stalinist dictatorships. They're still alive, and they will tell you what a real totalitarian regime looks like. And there are people who come from countries that have suffered coup d'etat, some of them within the European Union. And they will tell you what's going on here is not a coup. We are not living in the 1930s. We are not living in a time where the far right, the fascists, are on the inexorable rise. No, what's happened is that the right has realigned itself a little bit to where it used to be a few years ago. Okay, it's shifted away from the kind of a kind of globalist in bed with the progressives. It's just moved a little bit more to the conservative right. It's not gone to the far right, but these days anything gets labelled the far right, and these people are just hysterical. And I just finding myself calling them out every day. I've developed this nice little comic thing where I take somebody's hysterical tweet, or a tweet that is just so filled with self-serving lies, that I just sort of snip bits that they say and then put in brackets what they really mean. So yes, it's a kind of trick that I remember Stephen Colbert doing on the Colbert Report, where he did that segment, The Word, where he would speak in his kind of rhetorical style, but on the other side of the screen there was a kind of what he really means in the sidebar, and that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to do that for the Twitter format. So where does this leave us? Well, as I come back to Britain, and I'll be more exposed, I think, to the culture wars. I think it's between the diehards at the moment. I'm not sure how many normies are going to get swept up in all these shenanigans. But look at it, support for the Conservative Party has gone up. What will be interesting to see how the Brexit Party react. I hope they don't divide the Brexit vote to the extent that we are just going to have the progressive Rainbow Coalition get swept in by mistake because the Conservatives and the Brexit Party can't cut some deal. Maybe Farage is posturing, but behind the scenes, he will agree to some kind of deal with the Conservatives. We shall see. But in the meantime, I look forward, he says, to a week of more meltdowns, more lunacy, more lies, and the ludicrousness of the left. It would be utterly laughable if there wasn't something chilly behind it all, and the fact that it's a naked attempt at power grabs. Could be worse. I could be stranded on a yacht with Greta Thunberg. Anyway, that really does take the biscuit. I'll see you next week.